and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Beva. Okay, well, we'll just follow the normal format. I'm going to go through things fairly quickly because, you know, there's so much happening and the movie's an hour 20 minutes, so I need to speed this up so we can start the movie on time, or you'll all be here late. So, national events. You know, we've got a shutdown. And this shutdown is so much more important than just a border wall, a barrier, a fence, or whatever else you want to call it. It's about our national sovereignty. It's about being a country. It's about protecting the citizens within the United States with using our tax dollars wisely. The whole works. It has so much more to do than just the illegal immigrants that are trying to cross the border. And the main reason, I mean, Trump ran on, build a wall. And we want a wall. And we need to let everybody in Congress know that it's not his wall, it's our wall. And we need to speak up and get loud. So as you probably know, the Democratic leadership, just go ahead and sit down somewhere there, Laura. The Democratic leadership refused to attend the Department of Homeland Security briefing. So this was a week ago. What he did tonight was pretty cool too. So Trump sent a letter to all the members of Congress and attached the presentation that Christian Nielsen was planning to deliver to the leadership. The letter, and there's only 3 per table, so share. The letter that's on your table details the points that are in your presentation. So this is what was prepared for Congress. So he talks about how this crisis is different. We have drugs, we have criminal gangs and terrorists, and, you know, a very vulnerable population. And the solutions we need are finishing the border wall, fixing TVPRA law to allow consistent treatment of unaccompanied alien children, and overriding the Flores settlement to allow families to remain together. So I think that all of you probably are a little more educated than I am, but I didn't know what in the heck all this meant. So just so that you know, TVPRA stands for Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. Now that was passed in 2008. What it was done for, it was designed to strengthen the trafficking laws and govern the rights of unaccompanied children. And then the Flores settlement is an older settlement. It came about in 1997, and it set policy for the detention, release, and treatment of minors in custody of INS, which is now DHS. So let's look at these one at a time. So the TVPRA, you know, there's 2 main points of this law. And it applies, like I said, to the unaccompanied children from non-contiguous countries. So this doesn't apply to children from Mexico. This doesn't apply to children from Canada. This applies to the immigrants that are coming up through Central America or from Iran or wherever they're coming from that are not contiguous with the United States. So they're referred to the HHS office. So that's the Department of Health and Human Services office. And then within that office, there's a refugee resettlement office. And they've got to be referred to that office within 72 hours for screening and placement in the least restrictive setting possible. So this is what is supposed to happen to our unaccompanied children from Guatemala, El Salvador, wherever. They are placed in removal proceedings. They're placed in the care of a family member, this Office of Refugee Resettlement, or foster home pending their removal hearing. And then they're provided access to counsel to the greatest extent practicable to represent them in legal proceedings or matters and protect them from the mistreatment, exploitation, and trafficking. So what happens is that these children are placed normally within some type of a government agency to take care of them. And they have to do it within in some pretty quick situations, and the proceedings, of course, are so backed up that it's pretty darn hard to get anything done in a hurry. So now the Flores settlement, it applies to minors in the custody of the DHS. And this ended up in a lawsuit from one of our, and I think it was a good lawsuit, of a child protection type group for a child from El Salvador who was put into confinement in a multi-sex, multi-age place, so elder man along with this 15-year-old. She was strip searched daily. I mean, just ridiculous, incomprehensible things that were done. And of course, this required some legal intervention, and we ended up with the Flores settlement. So, but what the problem is the Flores settlement requires the forced separation of children from their parents. Because in the case of a family unit that's apprehended for illegal entry, the adults are placed in immigration detention facilities for an undetermined period of time. And the Ninth Circuit Court, our good old Ninth Circuit Court, rule that covers, Flores covers both our unaccompanied and accompanied minors, and they set a standard so that they could be held no more than for 20 hours. So you've got these kids coming in with their parents. They can be detained with their parents, but they can only be detained for 20 hours. So are you going to put the children in a separate facility and detain the parents for longer, or are you only going to detain the family unit for 20 hours, and then what do you do? So rather than separating the children from their parents, the whole family is basically released in 20 days, pending their removal hearing, and that most of the people don't ever show up for. And so, and we don't even know where they are. So that's the dilemma that the Trump administration is facing. If you detain the children, they can only be detained for 20 hours. If you keep them with their parents and don't want to separate the families, then they all have to be released. And if you separate them, you're a really bad person that are separating families. So the whole thing boils down to laws that we've passed that we have not really looked at the consequences of. And, it's our Congress. They make the laws, and then they want the laws followed. But if you follow the laws, then you get eggs thrown at you. So it's pretty crazy. So that explains what he's saying as far as solutions, is that we need to really look at figuring out what TVPRA and the Flores settlement, how it's really impacting all of this, and getting on with figuring out what to do about the whole mess. Because, guys, we've got a mess. So again, this is the PowerPoint presentation that Christian Nielsen was going to give to your legislators. So when you look at the increasing drug levels, you see all the increases. I mean, 73% increase in fentanyl just in 1 year, 22 in heroin, and 38, in that other one that I can't read there, methamphetamines. Look what they seized: 282,000 pounds of cocaine, 248,000 pounds of methamphetamines, 65,000 pounds of heroin, 2,400 pounds of 24 pounds of fentanyl. 1.7 million pounds of narcotics are seized by the Border Patrol in 2018 only. I mean, think about it. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. So then when you look at, how Trump talks about that we have these bad people coming across. Well, 17,000 adults of the southern border with existing criminal records were arrested by the Border Patrol in 2018. It's not 10 years or anything. 17,000 in 1 year. 3,755 people are known or suspected terrorists prevented from traveling or entering into the U.S. Well, that's super, but we only apprehend about 10% of the people that are coming across the border. So what happens to the other folks that get across the border? Hard to say how many there are. 6,000 gang members, including MS-13, are apprehended at the southern border and removed. Well, I'm glad 6,000 are removed, but what happens to the people that come across? Each year, criminal organizations gain $2.5 billion in profit from migrant smuggling. I mean, this is a big problem, guys. It's so much more than people coming into the United States looking for a better life. This is way more than that. So then when you get on to the vulnerable populations that are just overwhelming what we're paying for, and remember, these are 2018 numbers. And we have organizations that are helping these people to come to our country illegally. They think they're doing good work. And so when you start looking at these religious organizations, church organizations, etc., that are helping these migrants come up here, this is what they are doing to us. You know, you're looking at 60,000 unaccompanied children. What are we going to do with them? And 161,000 family units arriving in 2018, an increase of 50%. How do you handle it? How do we as taxpayers pay for this? It's not right. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a 2,000% increase in asylum claims, yet 72% of migrants report making the journey for economic reasons and therefore would not typically qualify for asylum. And yet we know that our do-gooders that are helping them go into the camps before they approach the border to explain to them what they need to say, why they're requesting entry, so that they will qualify for asylum. So then we end up with a humanitarian crisis. And there you can see that we have 50 migrants per day that need medical services. 4,300 people in distress. 31% of women and 17% of men are sexually attacked on their journeys. If they didn't think that they had a chance of coming into the United States, would they be making this trip? This is not right to put people, I mean, desperate people that really want a better way of life to make this journey and then subject themselves to what they're subjected to. And there are a lot of deaths along the way also. And we're allowing it to happen by not passing legislation and laws requiring that our laws be followed and that they're strict and that they are not going to be welcomed illegally. Yeah, it's just reading something today. We have a lot of tuberculosis, we have a lot of parasites, we have a lot of other diseases that these people are bringing with them. Those aren't diseases that they acquired on their journey. These are diseases that take a while to get. And so they're ill when they start. And, you know, there's just so many dangers on the journey. And a large number, 7 in 10, are victims of violence along the journey. Not good. So then when you look at what are we going to do, I mean, here we got all this influx of people at the border. What are we going to do? So you have detention challenges. Do you know that we have 3 family detention units in the United States? 2 in Texas, 1 in Pennsylvania. I have no idea why we have 1 in Pennsylvania, but we do. And maybe it's for the Canadians, I don't know. And, you know, so you're looking at that. What do you do with them? Where do you put them? Where's the spacing? How can you handle them? You can see that we are forced to release them. You have adjudication challenges. We have 800,000 cases that are backlogged. I don't care how many judges that you put in the whole works. It's how do you handle 800,000 cases. Only 1 in 10 of the asylum claims are actually granted. So what happens to the other 9 in 10? Well, they're wandering around in the country somewhere and they know damn well not to report anywhere. They're just going to stay under the radar. And then you have fraudulent claims that delay legitimate claims from being heard, delaying the protection for those. And I think a lot of you know that I became a citizen this year. Last year. It was pretty straightforward. I mean, I've lived here for years and was very, very careful. I mean, darn, when you're protected as a permanent resident, that's great, but you stub your toe, you think, whoo, they could deport me, right? So there wasn't a lot to check. So I go in to do my interview with the INS guy, and he has this little teeny stack of papers, and then he has big stacks of folders. And so I was talking to him, and we ended up doing my interview in about 5 minutes, and he's allowed 30 minutes, so we ended up talking, which was really fun. And the big stack of folders are all the people that are basically lying in order to gain citizenship in the United States. So they have to really research and figure out, is it serious enough not to allow them? They didn't claim this, they didn't do this, they, on and on and on, and they just don't follow our laws. And you're going, wow, So when you look at 800,000 cases backlog, and then if they, how do we handle it? It's not possible. So when you look at removal challenges, in just 3 days, the Border Patrol apprehends more families than are removed in 1 year. Get your hand around that. Get your head around it, not your hand. The result is often a release with a notice to appear. Communities and charities are having trouble keeping up. And 98% of the family units and unaccompanied alien children are never removed. And so when we're talking about we have 11,000 illegals here, or 22,000, or whatever you want to say, we don't know how many people are here illegally living in this country. Excuse me. So when you look back at the first slide, the solutions needed, we have got to have a barrier. I don't care if we have drones that can detect that 10 people came across over here. So now we have 10 more that have crossed, whoopee. A drone doesn't do a darn bit of good in apprehending or keeping them out. It just detects. So many of the things that they're talking about just detect. So we can give you better numbers. But if you don't know the numbers, if you can't stand up and start speaking out about this, then what good are the numbers? We have got to stop them crossing the border. And then amend these darn rules that we have in place as to how do we treat unaccompanied children, how do we treat the accompanied ones, and really get this thing so it can start rolling and being used correctly. So what I've got now is a short video, and it's actually, if you go to, and I really ask you all to do this, is to go online and look at the entire film, which is 44 minutes. We've cut this down so it's under 20. It's called Not in Vain. Sarah Carter, how many of you know Sarah Carter, the reporter? Done a lot of investigations as far as the whole Mueller thing and the Russian investigation things. This is another project that she's been working on, and it's called Not in Vain. And I think it'll give you a far clearer picture of the drug and gang problem that we have to reverse. And it's up to us to reverse it. It's up to us to support President Trump and the people that are supporting 5.7 billion. How about 25 billion? That's where we started.
Part of the reason we're in Arizona, Chris, is because you were so adamant that this was an important place that isn't covered enough in the media.
You know, this is really, in Arizona, the super highway for narcotics, drug smuggling. You know, the zone that runs basically from, let's say, Aravaca, which is a town just northwest of Nogales, all the way over to Naco, has an enormous amount of drug trafficking, smuggling going on, besides all the illegal immigration and the human trafficking.
Why do you think these drug cartels utilize this passage so much?
You know, it's a broad swath of stuff. So you've got very sophisticated criminal operations that know how to move contraband, and whether that's drugs or people, they've got a wide array of stuff.
As they're traveling through, the cartels control the smuggling routes.
Robert Arce has worked both federal and local law enforcement. He served in both the Department of Justice and the Department of State. During one of his assignments, he spent 3 years in northeast Mexico, working the international narcotics trade.
Whether it's a human smuggling or the drug trafficking, you don't cross through those routes unless you are paying to those cartels. If you're a smuggler and you're not paying and you get caught, the sentence will be death. They will kill you.
According to the Congressional Research Service, there are 9 major drug trafficking organizations called DTOs or cartels operating in Mexico. These cartels have a long history of violent battles over strategic routes and distribution points on both sides of the border.
Well, right here in Arizona, the dominant cartel is the Sinaloa cartel or Sinaloa Federation, but the Sinaloa cartel is broken up into numerous groups. They have their U.S.-based groups operating out of Phoenix to include security or armed wings of the Sinaloa cartel operating within the Phoenix area, protecting the drug houses and in charge of the distribution to send out onto the rest of the United States.
According to the DEA, the Sinaloa cartel is the major supplier of heroin and opioids in the lucrative U.S. market. Even after the capture of their billionaire founder Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in 2017, the cartel continues to thrive.
Chapo Guzman was one of Forbes' wealthiest individuals in the world. The emerging threats.
Derek Maltz is the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration's Special Operations Division. He says that under Guzman's leadership, the Sinaloa cartel mastered advanced intelligence gathering techniques.
They have people in the telecommunications industry that look at the current trends in encrypted communications, how to beat the system. I mean, look at Chapo Guzman. Chapo Guzman had his own communication system set up by engineers, like really, really smart people.
We're dealing with the Sinaloa cartel. This is their territory, and obviously they're operating through here.
Marcia Armendariz is a supervisor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection in Nogales, Arizona. She says her station is under constant surveillance by cartel operatives.
We are what we call a point of disadvantage because Mexico does have the higher ground. So they're actually, we're actually exposed for them to see everything that we do here, whether it comes to what type of operations we're running and who's working, who's not working, what we're doing, what we're not doing.
I mean, they're very good at what they do. There's no doubt about that. And we don't have the manpower and even the technology, to beat them.
Patricia Kramer is the Arizona chapter president of the National Treasury Employees Union. She says the cartels are an unconventional enemy that is feeding the opioid epidemic in America.
Scary because the cartels, they have no policies, right? They don't have a headquarters that's telling them, no, you can't do this, and tying their hands.
They have no bureaucracy, right? They have no budget constraints. They have no policies. They don't have any real processes like we do in law enforcement to follow. So they're about making money, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to make money.
They have all the money in the world and all the technology and the manpower in the world to beat us. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. They're beating us.
What you need to understand is that the distribution system for the cartels is exactly like Walmart's. Walmart never runs out of milk. The cartel never runs out of drugs. They'll use anything: trains, planes, boats, trucks, cars, and people.
How do they try to hide it from you?
We do not underestimate anybody because it could range from, an elderly person to a really young person. The youngest person we've encountered here was a 12-year-old kid. The oldest person that I've dealt with, she was 96 years old.
What was the 12-year-old strapped with?
That 12-year-old had cocaine.
Wow, and the grandmother?
The grandmother had methamphetamine and heroin.
When I was out in the field doing interviews, I was reminded of one thing. The cartels don't respect any living thing. They just don't care.
They don't care because the cartels are interested in making billions of dollars. And in order to make that money, they have to control the points of access into the United States across the entire southwestern border.
In the month of May, it's a record-breaking, the most murders in the history of Mexico, May of 2018. Last year, 29,000 people were killed in Mexico. The violence is escalating through the roof.
It escalates to the point where you have spillover violence. Where the drugs go, the violence follows. Jim Chilton is a rancher who has ties to southern Arizona that go back to the 1890s. The cartels move people and drugs across his land all the time.
You actually had a Border Patrol agent targeted by the drug cartels on your property.
Well, first, we felt really sad for the Border Patrol agent and his family. Second, it's an everyday risk we all run of getting shot. I've run into situations where you have guys with AK-47s. I carry on my saddle a pistol and a rifle, and if I see a bunch, I go the other way, try to avoid conflict. And the Sinaloa cartel scouts on our mountains, we are hoping and believe they're guiding their drug packers around us.
Just
or
to
that
avoid
way,
each
to
other.
avoid each other, yes.
After speaking with Mr. Chilton, I was thinking, he was talking about avoiding, not stopping. He was literally surrendering his property line in order to survive.
If we don't stop the tidal wave of drugs coming into our country, the border, at one point we used to look at the border with Mexico and Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, California. The border has moved so much further to the north, we don't even know where the border is at anymore.
You have this poison being dumped in our country and our communities are suffering. Kids are dropping dead every day of the week. Parents of good kids are going up to their bedrooms, finding their kids passed out dead. I mean, this is a crisis that we've never seen before. So we need a greater sense of urgency.
To fight this epidemic, we have to control our southern border. To some people, that's political. Okay, fine. But here are the facts as reported by multiple government agencies and news organizations. Most of the heroin coming into the United States is cultivated on poppy fields in Mexico, with Mexican drug cartels controlling the production and distribution, feeding it into the United States.
The DEA calls the Mexican drug cartels the greatest threat to the United States. And that threat has intensified because of fentanyl, a drug that is killing our children and can literally be used as a weapon of mass destruction.
The Nebraska Highway Patrol pulled over a tractor trailer, 118 pounds of fentanyl, okay? According to the experts, that could kill 26 million people. You use salt and pepper, right? 4 grains of salt is equivalent to like 2 milligrams of fentanyl. So think about how small 2 milligrams, 4 grains of salt is. That's all you need to kill an adult.
So if it only takes 2 milligrams of fentanyl to kill a person, that's worse than anthrax. The Center for Disease Control calls fentanyl the most prevalent and the most significant synthetic opioid threat to the United States. When you hear the word fentanyl, what comes to mind?
Death.
Daniel Baker is the chief toxicologist for the Franklin County Coroner's Office in Columbus, Ohio.
as long as fentanyl use continues, that drug overdoses will continue and deaths will continue.
Over the last several buys we have done with oxycodone, which is Percocet, the pills have been coming from Detroit according to the purchasee, and after getting those pills back, sending them off to be tested, they've come back to be tested as heroin or heroin and fentanyl mixture. What's frightening is I would say 40 to 50% of all the pills purchased from our task force on the street are coming back to contain heroin and fentanyl mixture now, and they're not what they were supposed to be.
This undercover narcotics detective, whose identity we agreed to conceal, works on an opioid task force in Ohio. I have to ask the question, sounds so crazy, but it's so dangerous. What would it take to weaponize fentanyl, or if you had an accidental release of fentanyl, just maybe in a stop, with officers?
That's an interesting question. When you're speaking of weaponizing any type of drug, I don't think you want to hear fentanyl or carfentanil in that discussion. My main concern would be the initial release of a large amount of a synthetic into the atmosphere, and then after that, devastation would be who the hell is going to clean up all the synthetics that's still in the environment.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
The DEA threat assessment last year, they identified Central Ohio and Dayton as hubs for the Mexican drug cartel. Is this true?
It is true. We do have a presence of cartel in Columbus area.
So basically we have foreign narcotics organizations dividing up the U.S. to sell their drugs.
Oh, sure, yes.
How crazy is that to you when you think about that as an officer?
Oh, back years ago it would have been crazy, but after seeing it and working around it and, working closely with the DEA on some of the cases, it's common practice anymore. It's just, we see it, it's there, you can't unsee it.
How did this happen? Why was this allowed to happen? How did it get to this point?
In my opinion, when you're talking about anything that's worth multi-billions of dollars, anything's possible.
This undercover detective is based in Northern Virginia. He agreed to speak with me as long as we concealed his identity. His work focuses primarily on gang operations. Gangs such as MS-13 are the main distributors of street drugs. He says that shutting down the supply chains is a major battle because of how they are structured.
What we're dealing with is that a lot of these gangs and cartels are decentralized. And by that I mean there's no central hub where everything's collected, and then from there it's parted off to whatever destination is destined to go. Rather, we have hubs across the nation, and as soon as those drugs get across the border, they're immediately sent there. And then from there, it's distributed amongst the gangs for them to deal and sell to their customers.
So we have these hubs all across the nation. Now I'm seeing the scale of this crisis. So rather than look at the country as a whole, I asked the detective to take a step back and walk me through the distribution on a local level. He said the first step is to understand gangs and how members get into the United States.
They go out to Border Patrol and then they basically say, this and that, but then also take it to the next level where you may have an adult who's associated with the gang, and they'll say, hey, cut your hair, shave, cross the border, and when you cross the border, you're 17, and then we'll take you, and then that person who's 23, 25, or 30 years old is now placed in a high school. And then now he's in charge of recruiting girls and other males into the gang.
I mean, you look at MS-13. What's their motto? Rape, kill, and control, right? And these guys, I mean, they are taking machetes and chopping kids apart. I mean, look at Long Island, that's my hometown. 25 people have been killed over the last 2 years from MS-13.
Our gang, our MS, they're in Baltimore, they're in Boston, they're in New York, Miami, they're in Ohio. So whatever ties they may have with one another, whatever business agreements, that's how they transfer drugs from point A to point B.
You described to me at one point, you said it's terrorism. They operate like terrorists.
They are terrorists, and I'm referring to MS. The way they operate, the way they do what they do, they are able to control a whole neighborhood hostage. And by that I mean kids can go to certain places, moms and their families are hurrying from from the store to the apartments because they're afraid to be outside.
Did you describe some of the people as monsters, or you described it as terrorist acts?
I think it's evil, and I'm not being over dramatic, it's just evil.
Heroin is evil. It took my daughter. I had cleaned her room out and found needles in the register and inside her pillowcase, and in the same time I'm kind of like in denial, like this is knowing it's happening, but you just don't want to believe that maybe it, how could she even put a needle in her arm? She said it was like seeing the face of God. She said, Mom, it was just an experience I can't explain. Maybe a mother's intuition, I immediately knew. I said, Marin relapsed, and he said yes. And then I went, is she okay? And he said, the paramedics are with her. We're probably gonna have to go to the hospital. So when he pulled in, it seemed like it took him forever, and the apartment was only 10 minutes from this house. And he said, I have to tell you something. He said, Marin is gone. And I said, what do you mean she's gone? He said, Heidi, she's dead. And I can't explain the pain. And it was like my gut had been torn out of me. And I said, I have to get to her.
Hey, wake up, bud. Wake up, man.
Kids are dying. It's as simple as that. Kids are dying, we're dealing with it, and I think we don't pay too much attention to it, and that's because we don't like to accept it, because it's ugly.
The hard part right now is Mexico has to cooperate, other countries have to cooperate, and we're being attacked by other countries that they're sending this, whether it's Mexico or some country, if it's China, it's coming from Asia, it's coming into the US. It's like we're under attack. It's what it is.
Here's my solution. A one-sentence order to the Department of Defense. Secure the southern border of the United States. Declare the cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. They're currently designated as foreign transnational criminal organizations, and that just isn't cutting it. When they're declared to be what they are, terrorist organizations, you give the Mexican government a choice. They can cooperate and get on board and help us to fight them as what they are, terrorist organizations, or we can do it ourselves. But making those designations would change the playing field dramatically.
This epidemic is killing our nation, our communities, and our kids. We have to end this crisis now and ensure that our efforts are not in vain.
So as I said, it's really a 44-minute long documentary. I really suggest that you look at it and really understand that this isn't securing our southern border from keeping people from entering is not about keeping illegals, families that want a better life, et cetera, out. It's about our national sovereignty. It's about protecting our citizens, and we have got to take a stand. We've just got to do it. This is one aspect. It's devastating. How many of you knew that fentanyl could be weaponized as a weapon of mass destruction? I didn't know that. That's pretty crazy. So you can text border, B-O-R-D-E-R, to that number to let Trump know that you're supporting his stand that he's making. So really write that down. You have those little slips of paper of upcoming events on your table. You can turn them over, write notes on them. but that's 88022, and I did it and it works, and I'm not a techie kind of person, so I know all of you in this room can do that. You got to use that word border, B-O-R-D-E-R, and that's the number that you're texting to. You know, this government shutdown, the wall, the lack of immigration law to fit America today, all of it has to be dealt with now. We have got to make a stand. No more promises. How many promises have you guys heard? As far as, you know, give amnesty, then we'll secure the border. Do this, then we'll do this, you know, and none of it's happened. They have passed laws to fund border walls, but then they don't appropriate the money. As Bevan and I were talking today, that's the oldest trick they've got. They'll pass the laws that we want them to, and then they don't appropriate. So you can't do anything if you don't have the money for it. You have got to start calling our representatives, our senators, this whole mess out and let them know that you're a hell of a lot smarter than they are. I'm tired of all of this, and I hope all of you are also, because this has got to stop. It's time for all of us to go to work. So your voice needs to be heard. We have put, and this is the very last item on your event sheet, we've put a PDF that gives you important contacts. That's the URL, but like I said, it's on that little sheet that's at your tables. It's actually 6 pages. So I didn't print out a lot. There were a few up there on the table. And it goes into not just our Washington state contacts as far as the governor and our reps and our senators. It goes into our county people, it goes into our city people, and it goes into the federal people. And if you download it, those links are live for you. So you can be emailing people and you can be doing what you need to do. There was a question back there? Oh, you're a waitress, Stephanie. The gentleman's waving at you. So it's a very comprehensive list. So download it. Let Trump know that he's supported. And I would suggest that you do this every day, not just thinking one time does it. Do it every day. Let your representatives and senators know, and you need to start flooding Cantwell and Murray's email boxes and anything else that you can do, and let them know that this political game they're playing has got to stop. This is our wall, this is our border, this is our country, and we want control of it. And looking at all of this, you know, we've got to stress no amnesty. There's no amnesty or legal protection for the illegals until our border is secure. We've always done it backwards, and it's never worked for us. You got to call them out. So, you know, I'm just asking you all to make a New Year's resolution to be more involved in our local, our state, and federal government this year. So this PDF that you can download is going to give you all the email addresses you know. You might want to look up Pelosi's and Durbin's and Schumer's also. Start flooding them and just don't let up. Let your voice be heard. This is the only way that we can take some control of our country back. And I think you can probably tell I'm a little bit upset about all of this, but this is wrong. We have got to support that wall. We don't want to compromise. I was so proud to hear that President Trump just asked Pelosi if he was getting his money. She said no, and he said, well, then there's no reason for this meeting, and he left it. And we need to support him. So when you go home tonight, you let him know that you support it, and you let Nancy Pelosi know that you support the president's actions. Got to do it. You've got to do it. This is your time. State issues. We got some fun things. We've got some good news for Washington State. So the Idaho Public Utilities Commission denied the sale of Avista 1 to, of Hydro 1 to Avista. And then today, Washington's Public Utilities Commission said they are not going to revisit their ruling. They're keeping it where it is. So That sale is done. So there were 5 states involved: Montana, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska. Montana and Alaska are wimps. They approved it. Idaho and Washington said no. Oregon says, we don't know what to do. We're going to wait to see what everybody else does. And so we will not reconsider the decision. So as far as this sale goes, it's pretty dead in the water. What Rob tells me is there's other suitors out there, so we're going to need to watch for that. 976, save our $30 car tabs. That they ended up getting 200, they turned in over 352,000 signatures. They needed approximately 260, so this will be on the ballot in November of 2019. So again, we need to thank Jack and Mike Fagan along with Tim Iman for continuing to really watch out for us. So again, that, to my way of looking at it, was some pretty good news. So if we go on to Spokane County, you know, this is old news, but it sort of slipped by me without a lot of attention here. I didn't notice it. So back on December 11th, Mary Cooney was in Olympia, and Josh Kearns and Al French did this, and they voted to stop negotiating with union contracts behind closed doors. And so what the resolution states is that copies of any bargaining proposals will be posted on the county's website within 2 days. Notices will be posted before all bargaining sessions, and negotiations will take place in a manner that is viewable by the public in real time, either in person or on video. So this transparency policy follows several years of lobbying. And that was actually lobbying by what we call the Libertarian-leaning Freedom Foundation. They do a lot of good work, and I really suggest all of you support the Freedom Foundation. Another little thing, a gem I found on the Freedom Foundation, is that they've had 25% decrease in SEIU's membership because of the independent healthcare providers have finally been told that because of the Janus ruling and those kinds of things, that they do not have to pay union dues. They don't have to belong to a union. So Freedom Foundation, good organization, follow them. This slide here, I found, you know, I have 2 sides there of a safer software as far as the other. And that safer software is an interesting story. What it is an effort to reduce jail overcrowding with more emphasis to determine which defendants should remain in jail and which defendants could be released. So this is all a pre-sentencing type of thing. And so a few years back, the city and the county of Spokane decided to develop their own software, very unique to Spokane, rather than using a simpler software that was sort of an off-the-shelf program, which happened to be free. So after 3 years and over $100,000, the powers to be have decided to scratch the safer software and revert to the off-the-shelf software, which is free. Now the whole purpose of this, again, is to determine when the judges are sentencing people, are they apt to show up for their hearings, or are they going to skip? And if they can't afford bail, so what are we going to do with them? And in more cases than not, we've been putting them in the county jail, which takes up bed space and the whole thing that way. So what's happened in this, it's being used statewide in Kentucky, Arizona, New Jersey, and Utah, and in quite a few counties across the country. And of all the defendants released before trial, the share who were released on their own recognizance rose from 36% to 85% after implementation. And it also eliminates racial disparity. And so it's sort of probably a good step that we took. And there's no point of housing people in jail that don't need to be there. and there is a point of housing them in jail that do need to be there. So I thought that was sort of interesting. You've probably read that Commissioner French is saying it's time to build a new jail. Our downtown jail was built in 1986. It reasonably can house 886 inmates. Currently there's 956. Can we reduce any of that through releasing people that should show up on their own recognizance? Possibly. There's other factors. We have determined about 140 beds for federal type issues, not county ones, that maybe if we need the beds, we should tell the feds to get their own beds and we'll use ours for our stuff, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of things going on, and there's going to be a big push for a new jail. On to the city of Spokane. Want you to know that Spokane does not, I repeat, we do not have the 5th highest homeless population in the country. That was total hogwash that was being reported, and if you read it quickly, it's looking like, oh my gosh, Spokane has a tremendous homeless population. What it is, it's classified as having the 5th highest level of homelessness in what HUD calls other largely urban areas. So it doesn't consider Seattle or New York or San Diego or Los Angeles or other things. It considers us as 5th largest in communities approximately our size. So it doesn't include the 50 largest countries in the nation. So countries, cities, country, whatever it is. So with that said, we do have a problem. We have 1,245 people living in the area that are habitually homeless, and Washington State is the 5th highest state in numbers of homeless people residing in it. So just so you know what they're reporting to you, read the details, sort of crazy. So what we've got is the 9th U.S. Circuit Court ruled that our laws concerning camping and sleeping and sitting on public property is unconstitutional because it criminalizes people that have nowhere else to go. So they said that's not a good thing. Kate Burke obviously is on the, pushing all this homeless stuff, and she proposed to repeal the sit and lie ordinance. But that was deferred indefinitely by the rest of the council. So hats off to the council. So what we feel is that because the people are given a 48-hour notice to remove their belongings, they can only do that if shelter beds are available. So therefore, there is another place to go, and therefore the law and what we're doing is not unconstitutional. So you'll be hearing more about this. But when you think that we have 292 encampments in the Spokane County area that produce thousands of pounds of garbage, human excrement, bicycle parts, that kind of thing, I sure don't want to be the county worker cleaning that stuff up, let me tell you. City of Spokane Valley, is anybody here that wants to update us on Spokane Valley? I don't think so. Rod was quite sure that he couldn't be.
Valley rocks.
The Valley rocks. Very good, very good. And I want you all to remember that we have elections coming up for for all our city elections are this November. So this is going to crank into another political season, and I know many of us in this room want to see that the Valley gets a little bit more conservative. What I'd like to see is that the Valley stops building so many darn apartment complexes in it, because we are absolutely changing the demographics of our county. So it's not just the Valley, but the more housing we get, the more low-cost housing we get, the more this we get, etc. We are not staying a conservative constitutional area. And I'm looking at Spokane as not being a red county, but more or less a purple county, and I don't like that. So it's up to us to really pay attention to these elections and see that we're voting in people that understand who we are and what we're about. You had something to say, Judy?
I did. So I mentioned this to Caleb, and you know, when we had the Liberty people in Spokane Valley, and I said, you have got to stop ruling all of these high-rise apartments. They're purposely changing the demographics to make us not a conservative area. And they said, well, no, they have property rights, and if they want to do this or that, then they should do it. So it's not necessarily who you get in, but what they're on.
So my question to you is what board or commission can you be on in the city of Spokane, the city of Spokane Valley, the county of Spokane, that can have input to these kinds of decisions that we're talking about? What can you do? None of you have an idea? I think you can look, what's the building planning? Do they need planners? Do they need this? Do they need that? You guys have got to get on these boards. We have a person to speak.
Yeah, we were talking about this on the phone earlier today, Cecily, if you'll remember. There is a planning commission that is a citizen-oriented committee there, and they're always begging for people. The best way for us to have an impact in the county as well as city of Spokane Valley, go to your commissioners and get a list. They have a list of everything from cemetery districts all the way up. Get on one of those boards. They're the ones that make the recommendations. They're the ones that talk to the leadership and get it through. The apartment complexes are bringing in young people, which is wonderful, but we are increasing growth in the city of Spokane Valley at a huge rate, and they're not conservatives.
That's right. And we all know that our young people, unfortunately, most of them have gone to public school and they are not educated. They don't understand our government. They don't understand our Constitution. They don't even understand that we're a republic based on law.
May I add to that?
Add.
One of the problems with this building code is that everything we do in Spokane that's building code-wise comes from the International Council of Building Officials. That is a worldwide organization. I left California construction because of this. It was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. It wasn't what people needed in their community. It was to make everything the same. So part of that structure is to require that, well, you probably wouldn't know the area, but in Southern California, there's a wonderful area called Diamond Bar. It was a gated community. It was thousands of acres of beautiful estates with beautiful homes in a gated community. You can't build that anymore. If you want to build that, you have to have a percentage of medium income homes, and you have to have a mandated percentage of low income apartments. And you have to put them in your midst. And that's not right. That's not freedom. We have the freedom and the right to live where and how we want to. And so what we need to do is we need to revolt against that. We really do.
And we have an organization that works on that, so we'll get into upcoming events here and talk about that. So we're going into upcoming events. You guys all have your slips of paper, half sheets there. And like I said, there's one event that didn't get on there, so I want you all to have pens handy so you can write the information down. So Ponderosa Women, they meet tomorrow at their normal meeting place, Red Lion River Inn. Chris Cargill, who's the Eastern Washington Director of the Washington Policy Center, will be updating you on what's going on and what we're looking forward to in 2019. There is a luncheon cost of $20. You're a little bit late, but you can still call that 879-4058 number, and I know they'll serve you. And if they don't, you'll just eat lunch later. Not a big deal. The Friday Republican Coffee Club. We used to call that the Friday Morning Breakfast Club, and Rob turned that over to Tom Horn, I believe. And but it's still the same. It's 7 a.m. It's at the Something Else Deli. Steve Corker I don't think I'd get up at 7 for, oh, excuse me. He's recounting his experiences working in Moscow after the fall of the USSR in the early 90s. And I got to tell you all, since I retired, I don't like going to early morning breakfasts. Rob will tell you, I went once in a while, but very seldom. The admission's $5. There's free coffee. And something else deli has some really good pastries and things that way. So fun place. Every Friday. Every Friday. I think that I have that up there, I hope. No, I don't. But anyway, it's every Friday. Okay. And this is the one that is not on your slips of paper. So I really want you, if you are interested, to write it down. The Northwest Power Coalition. Their purpose is it's an effort to purchase a Vista at a fair price and transition into a co-op, which would give us local control, more transparency, and hopefully lower rates. That meeting is a week from tonight, January 16th at 7. It's in the Saranac Building, 25 West Main on the 3rd floor. So if you go in the lobby entrance, past the Magic Lantern Theater, at the back of the lobby to the elevator up to the 3rd floor, you can get there. I know Rob is involved in this, but guys, I've got to tell you, this is not a political organization. It is a bipartisan organization made up of everybody. And it's the idea of what can we do in order to more control our our utility provider. Rob, do you have anything that you want to say on this? If you do, you need to come up here.
Well, this is a bipartisan organization. In fact, it's all across the spectrum, so it's a mixture of progressives and also John Bircher's Tea Party type people. Lowell White comes to it, and so does Ron Davenport back there, John Christina, Cindy Zabataki has come to it, but and then an equal number of progressive, probably more progressives because they work better collectively, I think, than we do. But you know, we had to stop a Vista. A Vista, it wasn't capitalism, it was piracy. You know, they were going to feather their own nest, these guys, and so we had to do what we could to stop this. And strangely enough, you know, we feel, as representatives at that time as county treasurers, so we had a lot of citizen researchers that were looking at this, like Dave Bellinius of Davenport, Angelo Lanazario from Sandpoint, Tom Horn, and we could see this is a bad deal for the ratepayers and also the county of Spokane too. And how do we stop this? So we got together and brainstormed. My main role was I kind of organized the effort against that too. And then I filed coordination too, which was just a part of it. But we finally, as we found out yesterday, we stopped this thing. I don't think it's going to go anywhere else, but we did invite Vista to talk to us and give their side. They mentioned that if this doesn't go through, they had 4 more suitors that were interested. And we don't know who they are. I don't know if they're foreign entities or if they're local or what, but I think the best thing is if we take it into our own hands. We have local control, we have more transparency, we're not paying millions of dollars to these people, we are paying them as public servants, and as you know, I tend to go libertarian, but that's because I'm for what works. And I think some things you should have a public remedy for certain things like that, especially when you get the banks that get bailed out, you have the swamp, but not just at the global level or national level, you even have like a local swamp too that you become aware of. So I think it's in our own best interest to do that. The rules of the game are, okay, let's all focus on what we can do to make a co-op, and let's make it friendly, and no one's allowed to talk about Hillary or Trump when you get in there, or global warming or abortion. Let's just focus on the issue, and that multiplies our numbers because you get a lot more respect when you're across the spectrum. Then people see that there really is a concern here if all the parties are in agreement on that. So come if you can. I've learned a lot from it, and I've made some new friends all across the spectrum. And the nice thing is, if you do disagree on something, you go out and have coffee with them, and I've learned a lot from that too. And hopefully they've learned from me. So that's it. It's all good time. It's activism.
Thank you. is important. We need to stop staying in our own little cubby holes. We need to get out. I really appreciate Beva being here tonight, and I really invite some of you to go to the RSC meeting, which I'll have a slide on in a few minutes. So on Friday, January 18th, there is a Gun Rights Coalition Lobby Day that's been scheduled over in Olympia. A lot of the group is going over on Thursday, staying overnight, then they set up, they have legislative speakers between 9:15 and 10:30. 10:45 to noon, it's a meet your legislators. You need to contact your legislator for an appointment. It's at the Capitol, that address. Again, that information's on your slip of paper. Republicans of Spokane County Club, they have Al French talking. He's talking about his reasoning for the new jail, update on the 5-commissioner law, which he doesn't like, and update on the status of Spokane County. They meet at the Fairfield Inn, which is the old Quality Inn. So same place, Mission and Argonne, lower level, and they gather at 6. The meeting starts at 6:30. So again, I really would like to see these groups intermingle a little bit. People thought it was weird that Beva and I were working to have some type of coalition so we could start understanding each other. Exactly what Rob said. If you don't agree with people, go out for coffee, have conversations, talk, but don't just sit there and think they got two heads. That doesn't work. We need to work together. Okay, January 21st also, the Spokane Conservative Republicans, so we have RSC and we have SCR, meet at on the same date. The Spokane Conservative Republicans are meeting at Darcy's, again 6 o'clock for social hour food, 6:45, and their speaker is Ken Peters. Okay, we were talking about what we need to do as far as planning and those kinds of things. Citizens Alliance for Property Rights. This is probably the best organization in the country for working with property right issues. And the other thing they do that I like is they meet in different sections of the county. So this Thursday, January 24th, they are meeting at the Valley Library. Often they meet at the Argonne Library. Other times they work in the North Spokane Library. So they move around to make it more convenient for everybody. And again, I really feel it is an organization that you need to be familiar with and support. So we now have our open microphone time. And this is when, if any of you have something to say, you come up here with the microphone, you hold it closely, you stand here so you're on the video, and you talk about what you want. And I just want you all to know that I am not responsible for what speakers say at this meeting. So anybody want to come up here? If you want to come up, you got to come up. You can't stand there with your hand up in the air. Stand right here.
The video that we watched on drugs and the border really caught my attention. And I don't have a statement, but I have a question, maybe just to challenge your thinking on this. The old expression from follow the money, the deep voice, in the Nixon days, there's an awful lot of money in those drugs. And there's common, if you're for open borders, if you're for trying to get all the big cities into the Democrat column, or even the medium-sized or small cities, everywhere drugs goes, there's a common clientele or voter base, and I'm wondering how much of that money is channeled into supporting candidates that are against our beliefs.
Well, I've got to tell you that I read tonight that the head of one of the cartels is doing a GoFundMe fundraiser. I'm sure he's doing some of the fundraising to impeach President Trump. So, yeah, a lot of money goes in here. Anybody else?
That's
oh,
me.
John's going to talk.
I'm even getting in the boxer so you don't throw anything at me. So during the holidays, my son and I were talking, and he said we were having a political conversation, and he didn't like it too much. 50 years old, you know, I mean, I'm like, wow, you know, but anyway. So he told me, he says, Dad, he says, you know, there's just no hope for this political situation. And I said, well, especially if you're not going to try to do anything about it, there's not. And he said, well, have you watched Narcos? Yeah. And I said, well, you know, I did. I watched 30 minutes of one episode and decided that was enough of that. And anyway, he challenged me, and so my little TV binge over the holiday was to watch 4 seasons of Narcos, all of it. And I will tell you that it's astounding how involved our politicians are in that here, not just there. Mexico was a bought country. And you saw the map that was in Sarah Carter's report.
Sad situation. And again, unless we all get active, we are not going to change it. Is there anyone else that has anything else to say? Jeff, and then go ahead.
Real short. I started a new hashtag on Twitter and Facebook. If you post anything regarding the wall, if you could put the hashtag symbol and then my wall, and just see if we can make that go viral. It is our wall. It's not Donald Trump's wall, it's our wall. It's to protect us.
Thank you, Jeff.
I just wanted to say about what Cecily said about the public schools and not being educated. I went to St. Al's kindergarten through 8th grade, and I'm a junior at Gonzaga Prep. And I have never heard anything political or anything educating any of us about any of these matters or any national events at all. And I just think that it's kind of an issue and it should be thought about and resolved eventually. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I would like to see young people here at this meeting. If you can figure out ways that we can entice them to come, let me know, other than paying them because I don't have any money.
Well, I had to beat him. Actually, I have a question. Is that open?
Sure.
I've seen on, there was an email that went around. It said, GoFundMe Trump's wall? Yeah. Is that a legitimate thing? Yeah.
It is legitimate. However, they have to figure out how the Congress can accept that money.
Yeah, I was going to say, where does that money actually, where's it actually going?
Right. They're working on legislation that allows it to be only identified for the wall.
I saw it had been 2 weeks and it was up over 18 million.
That's over 19 now.
Huh?
Yeah.
19 now. Right. Yeah, so they are working on it, but it is sort of an interesting situation.
So I'm a small contractor. I have 4 guys that work for me. And I have sent notification to the president, and I don't know if it's reached him or not. We'll figure that out in time, but we have donated 2 weeks a year of our guys free to go work on that barrier. And if we can get every contractor in the country to do that, we would do this in overnight, and that we could just bypass this whole congressional mess. So, you know, if you know anybody that are contractors, you need to do that.
Yeah, why don't you talk to Mary Cooney about it? Okay, anyone else? Yeah, I want to tell you, Bev is out of the room now. When Josh and Al approved the transparency as far as having the union contracts talked about transparently. Mary was in Olympia, and when questioned about it, she says, I really don't know anything about it, because she has to protect her situation as far as being married to Max Cooney. We all knew that that would interfere with her job as commissioner, but she, quote, denied that it would. You had something to say?
No, I was trying to get waitress.
Oh, waitress, we have somebody over on table 70. Okay, well, we will go on now. Obviously, we do need some funds to keep this thing going with cables and lamps and goodness knows what else all that John creates here to keep this going. So contribution canisters are over here. Appreciate your support. And now is time for tonight's movie. And John, you might want to say a little bit about why you chose this movie.
Well, it's been lingering on my board we wanted to play it 4 months ago, but there's been so many really important things that have been up that we just kept pushing it off. But this is it's not an exciting movie, so God bless you if you need to go home. I can understand it. It's a little boring.
Just don't go to sleep.
But the thing is this is another Peter Schweitzer involved production. This is real research. This is the research that broke here just 3 months ago that proved without any question that all of the transactions between us on social media with Google, through our computers, Pablo Escobar in Mexico, everything that's been out there has been captured, every bit of it. And so you have that, then we have Facebook, and we see the situations that they found themselves in. We have Twitter. So this is the movie that was released 3 months ago that explained what that's all about. So nobody gets hung at the end. There's no grand jury that strings everybody up. There's nothing like that. It's just to really let us know what it is and help us to focus on the fact that it's not really going to change. It's out of our control. So be a little bit wise. Be a little, you don't have to be, I don't want to say that I'm so careful, but I'm not going to say things that are stupid, because why would I do that? So why would I do that on Facebook where it's going to be cataloged? Just the idea.
And like I said, y'all should break your fingers and not use the stuff, but that's okay.
All right, Miss Chester, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go. Yes. John can turn off the spotlight. Or Jeff.
Google and Facebook, they don't sell you anything. They sell you.
These are all free services, but obviously they're not. Your interaction with them is governed so that it will generate revenue.
You give Google a lot of information. You're searching for the most private stuff on Google, things that your wife might or your spouse might not want you to know about.
Facebook constantly manipulates their users. They do it by the things that they insert into the news feeds, and they do it by the types of hosts they allow their users to see.
They can suppress certain types of results based on what they think you should be seeing, based on what your followers are presenting.
It's what Google and Facebook are doing on a regular basis by suppressing stories, by steering us towards other stories rather than the stories we're actually seeking. That's the real manipulation that's going on.
I was a design ethicist at Google, where I studied how do you ethically steer people's thoughts.
It will always favor one online music service over another and one candidate over another. Google and Facebook has the power to undermine democracy without us knowing that democracy has been undermined.
There's what I call the creepy line, and the Google policy about a lot of these things is to get right up to the creepy line but not cross it.
Google crosses the creepy line every day.
If they have this kind of power, then democracy is an illusion. The free and fair election doesn't exist. There have to be in place numerous safeguards to make sure not only that they don't exercise these powers, but that they can't exercise these powers. The internet belongs to all of us. It does not belong to Google or Facebook.
I mean, we have empirical evidence that Google is participating in self-serving bias in a way that directly harms consumers. As a society, as a democracy, anytime you have concentration at the levels they are in the information sector, it should be concerning because they really are now more powerful than governments. They are a form of regulator, but they are a private regulator with no democratic accountability.
I can't believe in a system in which the power is separate from the people. We're talking about, some pretty arrogant people, in my opinion, who think of themselves as gods of sort and who really want to have a complete hold over humanity. So these are basically big mind control machines, and mind control machines, they're really good at controlling minds. It's going to be harder and harder to fight them if we don't do so, I would say, as soon as possible. The more rope we give them, the sooner we are all hanged.
I don't believe our species can survive unless we fix this. We cannot have a society in which if two people wish to communicate, the only way that can happen is if it's financed by a third person who wishes to manipulate them.
The traditional notion of totalitarianism was resting on the premise or the idea that a government would try to achieve total control over your life. And they would do it by using the might and muscle of government to do so under compulsion. Well, today we essentially have a totalitarian force in the world, and that is these large tech companies. But guess what? They didn't use stormtroopers, they didn't use the gulag, they didn't use the arrest of political prisoners to accomplish it. We all opted in to do it ourselves. We volunteered for this arrangement. And we live in a world today where these tech giants have a level of control and an ability to manipulate us that Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and Mussolini could only have dreamed of. The power is immense, and we are essentially trusting these large tech companies to make the right and good decision for us. I, for one, am not prepared to cede that level of power to these individuals.
In the meantime, if the companies won't change, delete your accounts, okay?
That's it. So there are other search engines that you can use, and I really think you should delete your Facebook accounts. But that's because I don't use mine. But anyway, that was the movie. John and Julian's here, and he's pretty up on all this kind of stuff. I mean, what is a good search engine to use? Is there one? On and on and on, so come on up here and people talk about all this, because don't talk to me about it.
Specific question, probably for John.
Hang on.
Not Julian.
No, okay.
It's on. I think it's on. I have a question for you. So I use Start Page, which is good, except on my computer it goes through Google.
That's what Start Page is.
And that's okay? Are they still watching you? Can they still track you?
Do you know?
I see everything you do in my dreams.
Yeah, so with Start Page, it's anonymized, so they can't track your searches. They can't. It goes through Google, but it's anonymized through Start Page. Now, what that doesn't address is the potential biasing, like what he's talking about. The results could still be ordered in such a way to bias people, so you can't get around that. There's also a web page called DuckDuckGo that doesn't have any of those issues. However, it's not necessarily that great of a search engine.
But you're saying Start Page doesn't use...
Hello, use a mic. I can't hear you over here. I have two mics.
So, are you saying Start Page doesn't use similar algorithms or whatever it's called to Google because it's powered by Google?
Yeah, it doesn't really do anything other than do a Google search for you. So everybody that uses Start Pages, all those Google results are aggregated. They don't know who's searching what. It's just a big hodgepodge. It's so much noise they can't do anything with it.
But your list on Start Page is the same list you'd get on Google, it's just they can't track you?
Yeah, basically. Although, so the other thing that Google does, and this was one of the reasons that Google got so big in the first place, is they start to learn about your preferences and they send you websites that they think are going to be more relevant to you. And so, like for instance, if you sign out of your Google account and do a Google search, you'll get a different list of sites than you would if you were signed into your Google account when you do the search. And so when you use Start Page, it's like you're signed out, so you're getting a completely uncustomized Google search.
But it's still able to control what is coming up.
Oh yeah,
they're still able to control.
Google sets
Google's
the order
doing
for all that
okay.
stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oops, just a second here. Okay.
Talk? Yeah, I felt the film was sort of biased in one direction, those who are not informed. But actually there's three different groups. There's the people that don't use the internet and get their sources from outside. Then there's the people that use the internet or Google or Facebook and get sources from outside. And then there's only people that use the internet. There's three different groups. And I thought they were biased towards one particular group.
As we learned in the previous stuff, over 75%
of the news that people are getting now are from the internet. So there may be three different groups, but there's one very large group in those three.
I'm thinking of, if you take them, those two, Google and Facebook, if they were doing anything that was not in accord with major multi-wealthy people, Soros, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, they're using tools, but they're not the ones. If they were out of line with that, they'd be wiped out. There's something that started about in the 1930s called a march through the institutions. And it was, you've heard that phrase, march through the institutions. I have actually taken it back to November 12th, 1905, 1/5 of a mile exactly from the Twin Towers at the Fulton restaurant. Yeah, you list a who's who in socialism. And they started a group that went all the way through the first half of the last century. It included John Dewey. The Education Association started brainwashing. The fertile minds were done back then. Google is just making it happen quicker. I've got some books that I acquired from the Beale Library. If you know who Beale is, I'm sure a number of you do. And it's amazing how many of them go back to doctrines of Calvin, and particularly on God's sovereignty and predestination. And it was amazing the depth of the books that were in Beale's library that would mostly be in the libraries of professors of theology at major seminaries in this country. So I'm looking at Google and Facebook and all of that as simply speeding up the process in the present, but it's done under God's sovereignty.
All right, well, that was the movie, that was the meeting tonight. I don't even want to see you again next month unless you download that list of contacts and start contacting our government officials and letting them know what we want. Because you've got to have your voices heard. I am not a controller. I'm just saying you need to be part of this country, for Lord's sakes, and do something. Do take the upcoming events lists with you. Know what's going on. We'll be back on the second Wednesday of next month. Not sure where, but watch your emails. And other than that, the evening's over. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.